Hello, beautiful angels. Welcome to my love letter to the world. My name is Iman Celine. I'm your host, and I'm so excited to jump into today's episode. Okay, so welcome to a new episode of Love Iman Celine. I'm very excited for today's topic, and as you guys can tell, we do have a little bit of a working set design in the works, okay? It is a work in progress. So if you're watching, hopefully this is a little bit easier on the eyes aesthetically. And if you are listening, then you can continue to just listen to my beautiful voice. Today, we are going to discuss something that has been on my mind for a while. And I've done some research, I've written my notes, and I'm really excited to jump into this topic. We're going to talk about something called the victim ego or victim identity, and I'm sure a lot of you guys have an idea of where this is going or what that means, but there's so much to unpack here that I really urge you guys to stay with me for this whole episode. I'm sure you can think of people in your life who you feel like are victims, or have that like victim mindset, but you might notice a lot of these patterns within yourself. And I think while I was doing the notes for this episode and doing some research, I learned a lot about a lot of these like victim, again, mindsets or feelings that sometimes come up for me too in different ways that I would have never noticed, which is why I really want you guys to stick around for this one. And I encourage you through this episode to reflect on yourself. Actually, I challenge you to try to think about whether any of the things I will discuss today apply to you and whether this shows up in your life in any way. But before you can point fingers at other people, which we're so good at doing, it's so important to look inward and see if we can recognize any of these patterns within ourselves. So I do encourage you to check yourself, okay? Check yourself before you wreck yourself. And I also want to put out a quick disclaimer as well. Everything that I am about to discuss in today's episode and everything that I'm about to unpack is truly coming from a place of love and coming from a place of empathy. Not at all do I want you guys to feel any sense of shame or guilt with anything that I'm saying. So even if you do notice some of these patterns within yourself, the goal here is not to shame or guilt you out of these patterns. It's to shine a light on them because I truly care about you guys and I truly care about making this world a better place. And it all starts with ourselves and our self-awareness. So just so you know, I'm genuinely coming from a place of love. I'm coming from a place of empathy. And I feel the need to put that disclaimer out because there might be a couple things that I touch on today that will be kind of like harder pills to swallow, right? Or maybe harsh truths. And so I just think it's really important that you guys know where I'm coming from when I highlight those things. Okay, so without further ado, let's get started with today's topic. Now, before we dive into kind of the whole victim ego, victim identity aspect of it all, there's a couple of key concepts that I want to define and touch on that I think are important for setting the scene for the topic. So the first thing is I want to talk about toxic positivity, and I'm only going to briefly go over this because I feel like a lot of people know what toxic positivity is. It was a term that was coined probably during COVID times and again made its rounds on the internet. So I'm going to briefly touch on it because it's had its 15 minutes of fame. But essentially the idea of toxic positivity is the idea that people can use positivity or positive wording to suppress their emotions or suppress the emotions of other people, or guilt or shame people for feeling a certain type of way. So for instance, let's say you have a negative emotion and someone tells you, oh my God, you should not be feeling like this. You should be grateful for everything you have. There are people in this world that are literally dying, that are going through, the worst case scenario, and you're sitting here crying over like spilled milk. That type of approach, it doesn't work because when someone is feeling a negative emotion, they're meant to be feeling it. We're human. We all have positive and negative emotions, right? And without the dark, without the negative, we wouldn't know the positive. So these emotions, they all have a space and they all have a place, and they should all be given the space that they deserve to be fully felt and healed, because you can't really heal unless you feel. Anything that has to do with not honoring your emotions, suppressing them or not letting them in, feeling guilty or feeling ashamed for having them or avoiding them, distracting yourself from them, anything that kind of falls into that under the guise of being positive, that is toxic positivity. And by the way, I want to be very, very clear here. Gratitude is something that I have been practicing intentionally for a while now, and it has genuinely changed my life, okay? It's not just knowing what I should be grateful for, but I truly, in my bones, I feel happy when I think about everything that I have, when I think about my life, when I think about myself. I feel so good, and having that sense, that really deep and honest sense of gratitude, it genuinely makes my problems feel a lot lighter, okay? So I do have to say that. However, if something happens and it makes me feel sad, deferring to that in the moment while I'm feeling it is, again, it's not going to allow me to fully process and feel the emotion. I do really appreciate that perspective, and I do really agree with it, and I wholeheartedly believe in feeling to heal. However, one thing that always irks me a little bit is something that a term that I coined, okay? Something that I like to call toxic negativity, which I don't think anyone is talking about. If that term already exists, sure, correct me if I'm wrong, but I've not heard anyone talk about toxic negativity, okay? My issue and my concern with that is that there are so many negative patterns that we as humans have kind of brushed over and allowed ourselves to continue to exhibit. And these patterns, they are toxic at their core. They're not healthy for us. So I'm going to read out to you my list of what I consider to be toxic negativity, because I truly think that if you're going to create a space for yourself to feel things, you also need to be able to actively heal and move on from them. Having this approach, this balanced approach of, experiencing positivity and negativity in a way that isn't toxic will allow you to effectively heal, process, move on, and continue on with your life. What this looks like to me is dwelling or ruminating. Again, feeling feelings, great thing to do, but continuing to sit in them well past their expiration date, reliving an emotion or reliving a scenario that conjures up a specific emotion within you, that is toxic negativity. When you don't make any attempt to actively heal from your traumas or from your negative emotions, and you don't try to pick yourself up, that is toxic negativity, okay? When you don't try to regulate your emotions or regulate your nervous system, that is toxic negativity, because regulation is key when it comes to healing, processing, and moving on. When you make no attempt, absolutely no attempt at wanting something better for yourself, when you make no attempt at creating a better lifestyle for yourself, when you make no attempt at trying to change your mindset towards life, that is toxic negativity. A pessimistic thinking style, always seeing the glass half empty and not thinking that good things are coming or good things can happen in life and to you, that's toxic negativity. When you let fear and anxiety run your life, right? So when all of your decisions are fear-based, when all of your life choices and life decisions are being driven by a sense of fear, that's toxic negativity. A very basic example, fear of missing out, okay? If you're going to the social gathering just because of FOMO, not because you actually want to be there and be present and enjoy like the socialization, that is not a good reason to be there. Don't let fear drive your decisions and your lifestyle. That's toxic negativity. Okay, this one I feel like is so important, and I'm calling out my friends. If you're listening to this and you're my friend, you're probably going to know who you are, but negative self-talk, okay? Negative self-talk is so bad for your psyche, and I don't think it's a good way to honor yourself or it's a good way to go about the world. I have heard way too many people making jokes about dying, making jokes about killing themselves or hating life. It's just such like a common thing that comes out of some people's mouth where it's like, oh, I just want to die, or like, oh, like I could just kill myself. Like, kill me now, kill me now. There is nothing that irks me more than that, because your words matter so much more than you think. When you just definitively say, I hate life, or I hate myself, or I want to die, or kill me now, that is toxic negativity. Okay, we want to cut that shit. Don't stop doing that. And this is my thing. If you're going to be the person who champions this idea of toxic positivity and who says, don't use gratitude to make me feel better, that's toxic, then at the bare minimum, you need to check yourself for doing the toxic negative things as well, right? Because then you're going to have an imbalance in your life, and you're not going to let the positive things come in, but you will like open the gates for all of the negative habits and the negative patterns. And the last thing on my list here is when you define yourself based on your traumas or your negative experiences. And that is actually what we would call the victim ego. Before we get into the victim aspect of it, I just want to quickly define ego in and of itself, because I think this can get misconstrued sometimes. Oftentimes we think that ego means arrogance, or when someone has a chip on their shoulder, like they have a big ego or whatever. The truth is, ego is simply your sense of self, okay? Ego is your sense of self. It is based on external factors, and it's based on comparison. Therefore, it is actually a false sense of self, because it is extremely subjective and it's not ultimate truth. For instance, let's say I'm a person who lives in this world and I'm the only person in this whole world, okay? And I'm going about life and I have an idea of who I am and whatnot, but then other people start to enter this world. There's another girl that enters the world, okay? And she has shinier hair than me and she is more fit, and I perceive her to be more attractive than myself. I will then perceive myself to be an unattractive person, right? Or vice versa. If you see people that maybe you perceive to be less attractive than you, you will then perceive yourself to be an attractive person. This is just a basic example, but that is how ego is formed. It's based on how you compare to other people, and it's not something that we necessarily do on purpose. It's just the way our brain works. That is why it is so important to highlight that it is highly, highly, highly subjective. And we tend to create these ultimate truths based on these subjective perceptions that we have. Perception is not reality. Even perception of self is not reality. Like, you might think you know yourself, but everything you perceive about yourself is just based on comparison. So how true really even is it, right? And this kind of ties into my last episode where I kind of discussed that at our core, we are just energy. We are just endless loving energy, right? And that is who I really am. That is truth. But everything beyond that I perceive myself to be is not an ultimate truth. It is a perception. The other thing about ego is that it is actually constantly scanning your environment for things to add to its sense of self, okay? So this is where it can get a little tricky, because our entire sense of self is literally based on these things. And having like an ego death, so to speak, can be a very, very turbulent thing to experience, because you start to question your reality. You start to question so much. And the other thing about ego is that it thrives on superiority. I think this is the part where people start to think that ego means you're arrogant, because that is the most obvious, I guess, form of ego, right? Like when someone just thinks that they're better than everyone else. But it can present itself in numerous ways, okay? One of which is called the victim ego, and that's what we're really going to discuss today. A good chunk of everything that I discuss today are based on the teachings of Eckhart Tolle. He is a spiritual teacher, a thought leader, and the author of The Power of Now and A New Earth. So if you want to dive deeper into the topic, I highly suggest that you check him out. Okay, so now let's dive into victim ego. So if ego is the way that you view yourself, i.e. your identity, victim ego is when you identify yourself as a victim, okay? And it's built around some sort of shitty event or shitty thing that happened in your life. For instance, something happened, you felt pain from that thing, and then what you proceeded to do was attach a story and attach an identity with that pain. Now that's the part that we should try not to do, okay? because we can't control the pain that we feel. Like if I'm just going about my day and someone says something to me that causes pain, that pain is valid, right? The scenario is what happened, and the pain that I feel as a result of it is valid. It's human. It's a negative emotion, like I said. And that's why I wanted to touch on those, those first few terms at the beginning there, because we have to honor our emotions and allow ourselves to feel things all the way through. But what we shouldn't be doing is attaching a story, like I said, with that pain, identifying ourselves with that pain, and defining ourselves based on that story or based on the pain that we experienced. Victim ego is when we derive our sense of self from being a victim to a specific thing. And the very interesting thing about victim ego is that it can be individual or it can be collective, right? And we see this a lot, especially with oppressed groups in society, where you might experience something that is very traumatic and someone else has had the exact same experience as you. And so you have this kind of like brotherhood or sisterhood, like, with that person where you get each other, you really get each other. And when it's a collective, it's actually a lot worse, because as important as it is to have those people that understand us and that can help lift us up, it's very easy for that collective to keep you rooted in that pain rather than growing from it, right? And that's something to always kind of keep an eye out for and be mindful of, that when there are people who understand you and when there are people who get you, who really get what you're going through, just be mindful of whether or not that is keeping you stuck in the pain or whether it's helping you really grow from it. And sometimes we need those things. Sometimes we need those people when we're processing and when we're feeling. But I think it's okay to outgrow those things as well. The thing is, there is an unconscious comfort that comes with the pain that we experience. This is where we're going to get into kind of the superiority aspect of it. Like I said, ego is built on a sense of superiority. So with a victim ego, the way that this shows up is essentially feeling morally superior in two different ways. Let's say there was a scenario and there was someone that caused pain within you. You would feel morally superior to that person. But also, you may unconsciously feel superior to people who are not as much of a victim in their lives as you are in yours. So even people that are completely unrelated to this scenario, that are just living their lives, there is this unconscious or subconscious sense of moral superiority that you have to those people. It's the idea that like, you guys don't have it as hard as me, or like nobody gets me, no one gets my pain, like no one has seen it the way that I've seen it. That type of mentality is actually rooted in this like moral superiority. This is a very subconscious thing. I don't think people are going around thinking that they're superior, but it's just this feeling that they have internally. The idea that other people can't claim victimhood the way that you do, so you feel morally superior to them. The problem with all of this, okay, is that when a significant part of your identity is that you are a victim, you are always going to be a victim because that's how you identify yourself. What you believe yourself to be is what you are. So if you view yourself as a victim, you will continue to be a victim to any scenario in your life, and you'll always view life as something that is happening to you. Why me? You'll always have this kind of like why me mentality. Why does this always happen to me? Bad things always happen to me. These things always happen to me. When in reality, maybe it was one bad thing, or whatever the case was, and because you identified yourself with that victimhood, you now will find yourself in so many more scenarios. And you'll almost subconsciously look for those scenarios. This is just who you are. So these things just always happen to you. Again, I say this with a lot of empathy because I don't want you guys to listen to this and think that I'm invalidating any experience that you've ever had. There are a lot of painful things that people have experienced and gone through. And the pain, again, the pain that you feel from those things is extremely valid. It's just the way you identify yourself after. That's what I'm really trying to focus on here. So now that we've kind of defined ego and victim ego, I'm going to go over kind of the ways that victim ego shows up in life. How do you know if you're dealing with a victim ego here? Number one is the idea that life is happening to you, not for you. It's the why me mentality, the why does this always happen to me? Life sucks, or like, oh, shitty life, whatever. Like that type of energy, that's one way that victim ego shows up. So it turns I was hurt into I am the one who gets hurt. Do you see the difference? Like something happened and I was hurt. That is the fact, right? But victim ego will tell you, no, I am the one who always gets hurt. This is just what happens in my life. That's not fact. That's how you're choosing to perceive and identify yourself. That shift is where the victim ego continues to fuel itself, when it attaches your identity to the wound rather than understanding that it was a isolated scenario and that it doesn't identify who you are. So the next way that victim ego shows up is when you replay the injustices that have happened to you. Now this is where I notice my victim ego showing up, because I actually do this often, more often than I would like to admit. For example, someone might make a comment towards me that is passive aggressive and I'm just like, what the fuck? Like, why did you say that? But then I will replay that moment, like a week later or something. If I remember it, I'll like bring it up with my friend and be like, oh my God, like so-and-so said this to me. Can you believe that? And then my friend feeds into it. They're like, oh my God, no way. How dare she? And I'm like, I know. And then it conjures up that feeling from within me again of like feeling like I was, I guess you could say, a victim in that scenario, right? And I do this. I am guilty of this one actually a lot. And the thing about it is when you replay injustices that have happened to you, it's actually very addictive. It sets off a dopamine circuit in your brain when you replay that injustice and when you re-feel negative feelings. So it literally is addictive. It's like any other thing that sets off a dopamine circuit. I try to like limit the energy that I put into a scenario. I will allow myself to feel it. And there's a difference between venting and dwelling, like I said. So I have the self-awareness to understand when I'm just venting and when there's something that bothers me that is sitting heavy on my chest and I need to release it. But once I've moved past it, I then need to recognize that anytime I bring it up again, at this point I'm just dwelling. I'm just reliving something that I don't need to relive, that honestly is in the past. Who cares anymore? It doesn't exist. And that person, maybe they've grown, right? Like, why should I continue to breathe life into an event that has happened so long ago, that I've moved on from, and that is not my current reality? So this is one thing I will admit. I do that and I'm working on it. Another way that victim ego shows up is actually through validation. When you're experiencing pain and you have a friend who gives you the space to feel things and sits there with you and holds your hand through these feelings and validates your pain, that is amazing. And everyone should have a friend like that. But it can be a tricky line if the friend then confirms that life sucks, the world is a shitty place, or whatever it is that you're complaining about. If they continue to feed into this larger truth, I think we all tend to do that as friends, especially if we believe that truth to be true, right? Like if I do really think that the world sucks, and when my friend is going through something, I'll validate her pain, but then I'll validate her belief by saying, yeah, the world sucks, everything's so shitty. And I don't think that's healthy. So as long as we have self-awareness in these scenarios, we can help each other, even in our friendships, to make sure that we're holding space for each other while also being empowered to still continue to live a good life and to enjoy life. Okay, another way that victim ego shows up is through comparison, constantly thinking that other people have it better than you. I do think that this shows up for people in, again, like a very automatic way. They're not trying to do this consciously, but it's the idea that like you see someone having a good life, or you see someone, doing things that you perceive to be better than how your life is going. And your victim ego will reinforce your victim identity. And it'll say, see, life is harder for me. I'm always the one that gets the short end of the stick. I really urge you to try to think about whether you do this or not, because I think we all, humans, it's kind of human nature. We have a tendency to compare. And that can be a problem when we're constantly thinking that other people have it so much easier or other people have it so good. And because your victim ego will literally swoop in the first moment that it can and will be like, see, life sucks for me, but it's so good for other people. Like, see, they just have it so much easier. It's so much better for them. I remember once I had someone say, like, Iman, like, you're so lucky. Like, you don't have to deal with kind of like, this was in regard to mental health, but someone was saying how I was so lucky that I didn't have as a, like, severe mental health issues as they did, and that like life was just so much easier for me. And the truth is, I actually disagreed with that. I was like, you don't really know what I experience. I choose to like be optimistic about life. I choose that every day, honestly. It comes very natural to me too. I like to see the glass half full, and I do give myself the space to feel things, and I do experience a lot of heavy and negative emotions, and I've had my fair share of like mental health challenges as well. But I don't want to reinforce that in my life, and I don't want to give it power over me. So yeah, maybe it'll be perceived as, oh, Iman has it so easy, or like, you know, she doesn't have to deal with what we have to deal with, etc. And I think it's very natural for people to feel that way. So I don't blame them, you know, and I'm sure this has come up for me too. I'm sure that I've like seen people and been like, damn, like they're so lucky. It's so easy for them. But you never really know like what goes on in someone else's life. You never really know what goes on in someone else's brain. You never really know like every single behind the scenes thing. Like you're comparing what you perceive someone else's life to be to so much more data that you have about yourself, and not enough data that you have about that person's life. The next way that victim ego shows up is by avoiding the present moment. When you don't have an ability to relish in the current moment and you're constantly either thinking about the past or worrying about the future, that can reinforce this like victim ego, because you miss the really good moments. And then when you miss those things, you don't feel like life is good, because you're constantly living in a state that doesn't even exist yet. You're not here now present to the beautiful things going on around you. Another, and the last thing I have on this list of how victim ego shows up is helplessness. So this is when you don't know how to help yourself. You don't make any strides in the area to help yourself. You feel helpless. You kind of just exist, and you don't think that any bright future is possible for you. So that's another way that it shows up. And that's really sad, to be honest. It's really sad to be living like that. And my heart does go out to anyone who feels helpless. And if you're listening to this, and if you do feel helpless, I just want you to know that you have so much more power within you than you think you have. Oh my God, I just got chills all over my whole body. You have so much more power within you, okay? You are not helpless. You are in control. There's so much about your life that you can control, and you can choose to create for yourself. Life, yes, there will be problems in life. Things are going to happen, and unfortunately, there are really bad things that happen to some people as well. It doesn't have to take away from the rest of your life though, okay? And I want you guys to know that. Like, I love you. That's why I'm telling you this. You have so much power. You have the ability to create the life of your dreams, and it could even be something as simple as asking for help. So if you're in a place where you feel helpless, just ask for help. And you can turn to your friends, you can turn to your community, you can turn to your family. And if you really are like, you don't have anyone, you can turn to professional help. There are so many tools out there that are there for us to use them. I really want to stress that, because no one in this world should be feeling helpless. And I'm really sorry if you've gone through things in life, or you've gone through experiences that have created that feeling within you. But you're not helpless. You're not helpless. You have so much more power than you think, okay? I love you, okay? And I really, really want you to know that I say that with my heart. And I say that from experience too, okay? There were times when I did not believe in myself, and I'm not gonna get too deep into that, but I saw a shift happen within myself. I kind of had to get to a place in life where things had to get bad enough for me to be like, okay, Iman, take control now. And when I started to take control, and when I started to build the life of my dreams, and when I started to learn more about myself, and when I started to look inward and quiet the external voices and quiet the noise and just go within, I started to see that like there's so much magic that exists here, like within myself. There's so much magic that exists in life, and it just starts with the awareness of that you have some control, okay? At the very least, you can ask for help. So now I'm going to move on to why we do the whole victim ego thing. Why do people live from their victim ego, and why do they continue to do that? Why does it actually feels good? It's something that we reinforce within ourselves. And the reason for that is some of these things are actually very hard to admit, and I don't know that people will admit this to themselves. And you don't have to go out on a platform and say, hey, I'm a victim or whatever, or like I have a victim ego. No, but I'm only just highlighting the reasons of why we tend to act in these patterns. And if you notice them within yourself, that is already like the first step of understanding that you can make a change in your life. One reason is sympathy and attention. This is one of those things that's hard to admit because no one wants to say that they're an attention seeker or that they're seeking sympathy. But it feels good. And that, I think we all know that. When you gain sympathy from people, it actually it fuels you. It gives you this like sense of specialness, right? So, oh my God, I'll give you an example. My grandpa, I believe he suffered from 2 heart attacks in his life. And he used that to identify himself for his whole life. Like in the most random scenarios that had nothing to do with it, he'll like bring it up and he would be like, I'm a heart patient, I'm a heart patient. And we would be like, we know like that you had these events happen to you, but you don't have to identify yourself as a heart patient for life. You know what I mean? I think there was this like sense of specialness that came with that and with him like saying that, and I'm laughing about it, but I feel like in a lot of ways he did have this like victim ego. I'm like honestly remembering a lot of the things he would say, and it was like kind of this thing of like wanting that sympathy from people, wanting to feel special, like I am a heart patient and I'm special because of it, and I get sympathy because of it. And again, maybe he didn't have the awareness to realize those things, right? I'm not shaming my grandpa, by the way. I love that man. He is like literally the best, cutest grandpa ever. But that's just an example of how it showed up in his life. Another reason why we continue to act from our victim ego is because this one's actually even harder to admit. It is really easy to not take responsibility for ourselves and for our lives, and to blame external circumstances and to essentially have an excuse to experience the suffering that we're going through. When you give power to other things in your life, when you give power to external circumstances, it's just easy for you to not have to do the work to create a better life for yourself because it's out of your hands, right? Like when you view it that way, when you think, oh, it's out of my hands, like I'm just a victim to life. Like these are the things in my life that are going on, and that's why I live like this, and that's okay. There's a lot of self-responsibility that comes with creating the life of your dreams, and that comes with being the best version of yourself. And our victim ego allows us to absolve ourselves of that responsibility and to just blame everything around us. But I understand the feeling of like something being larger than life. It feels like it's larger than life, right? And you're just spiraling out of control. But it is on you to find a way to manage that and to mitigate that. So another reason that we reinforce this victim ego is because it actually protects us from our own actions or from any sort of vulnerability. When you do something that's like out of pocket, for example, but you justify it because of what has happened to you. If you act in a certain way and you're like, these are my unhealthy patterns and my unhealthy habits, but it's because of the trauma that I had, as a kid, and now it's created this in me. Whether it's severe or not, we see a lot of people who don't really work on fixing their patterns and their habits. And those patterns and habits are a result of some trauma or some sort of thing that may have happened in their childhood or in their life. That's our responsibility, like as individuals, to fix those things, to, again, get the help we need to work on unlearning our patterns and to building, a healthy relationship with ourselves and with the people around us as well. Another thing, I already mentioned this one, but it is a dopamine hit, and the emotional intensity that comes with the victim identity is addictive. This one is actually very important to touch on. This is possibly the most important point on this list of why we have this victim ego, okay? It could be this fear that if you let go of the story, your pain will be dismissed. If you move on from the story of what happened to you, will your pain be invalidated? For the most part, I feel like this is probably the biggest reason that people cling on to this victim ego or to the stories, because they're scared that if they don't explain why they're hurt, they're not going to feel seen. And I just want to make it very clear that letting go of the story does not mean pretending that it didn't hurt. It means not hurting your identity. That differentiation is so, so important, okay? The pain that you feel from any scenario is literally a body response, right? I know that my feelings are always valid because I cannot control them in that sense. When I'm sad or overwhelmed, I cry. It just happens, right? When I'm anxious, my stomach drops. My heart starts beating fast, right? And it's not like I'm doing that on purpose. I'm not like purposely being like, okay, body, time to feel anxious, time to feel sad. These things just happen. My body just responds to these emotions. That's how I know they're valid, because I cannot control them. They just exist. But part of dismantling the victim ego or the victim identity is allowing yourself to feel the emotion, naming it, and saying, hey, I'm feeling anxious right now, letting it pass through you and not making an entire persona out of being the person who has anxiety, for example, okay? And I'm very aware that many people are clinically diagnosed with things like anxiety, but it still doesn't have to be your identity. I'm not saying that it's fake or that it's not real. It just doesn't have to be something that you give so much power to. And a lot of that comes in the way we describe it and the way we talk about it. Again, verbiage, wording, it always matters. I like to define anxiety as an emotion in my life, and that helps me a lot because I have a lot of instances where I feel very anxious. I actually want to do an episode of how I manage that anxiety because I've found some mindset shifts and as well as some tools that have really helped me in those moments. But it's a feeling that I experience. It's not who I am. I don't want to make it seem like I'm brushing away any sort of mental health issue or that I'm like saying that it's not real. So I'll give you a personal example. ADHD is something that I deal with from time to time. I don't like to say, oh, I have ADHD. This is just my own personal preference, by the way, but I don't like to label myself as like ADHD. But I do have to recognize it within myself in order to do something about it, okay? So avoiding these things is also giving it way too much power, if that makes sense. And that's why, again, awareness on these mental health issues, awareness of what's going on within ourselves is so important. If we avoid them, and there was a time when I used to avoid, like I really suspected, oh, do I have ADHD? I don't know. And I used to like just avoid it because I thought that like I would be using it as an excuse or like as a crutch if I found out. And I literally went through university without any accommodations or without anything to support me through that because I was so worried about it looking or me using it as like an excuse. And I think that in itself was also giving it too much power over me because I wasn't taking the time to be aware of what was going on with me internally and then finding the accommodations or the things that would help me accordingly. Here's the thing. You have to recognize and you have to validate maybe there's something that you deal with or that may pose to be an obstacle in some scenarios. But the reason that we want to gain that awareness is not to define ourselves by that thing. It's to be able to work with it and to do something about it and to find ways to overcome it, right? Because if we don't know that we're dealing with said thing, we won't be able to grow from it or to overcome it or to find tools to help us, right? So that is the reason that we have awareness. It's not to just say, oh, I'm labeled as ADHD and like life sucks and things look different for me and I'm going to excuse myself of all of these things because of just ADHD. That's not why I wanted to gain awareness on this. It was to better understand myself so that I could propel myself forward. And I understand that there are certain systems that are just going to look different or may not be accommodating for me, but that doesn't define me. I just work with what I have, and it pushes me to be a little bit more resourceful and creative with the way that I approach life. So it's kind of the same with anxiety, for instance. If you are clinically diagnosed, if you're on meds, etc., I completely understand that your nervous system just responds differently, okay? But have you put any systems in place to assist you with that, to accommodate you, and to help yourself? Awareness, again, is one part of it, knowing what's going on. But then what do we do with that awareness? Do we just sit in it and let it define us? Or do we try to find ways that will cater to our needs and that will help us go through life accordingly? The other difficult thing about this is a lot of times, at least within myself, I question nature versus nurture. Like, how much of this, like ADHD, was I born with? How much of it is a result of my environment? There are plenty of factors that may be standing in the way of me and being the happiest and best version of myself. But what can I do to reduce that friction? What can I do to change those environmental factors? Because our environment, it plays a really, really big role in how we view ourselves and in our mental health and in just like how we view life. Another like very, very clear example. This is something that I first started thinking about when I was in high school and noticing within myself that the way that I felt in the summer was way different than the way I felt in the winter. And I'm talking about just like my baseline, okay? So in the summer, it's actually a lot easier for me to be happy at my baseline. In the winter, it's a lot more difficult. This is a very clear example of how the environment will impact or create more friction between us and our best selves. So what can I do to reduce this friction? In the winter, I will take my vitamin D supplements. I'll use a sunlight lamp. I will be more intentional with moving my body and doing things that help my mental health and my sense of self. And I do need to maintain those things in the winter in order to just be at the basic baseline that I'm at in the summer. So like in the summer, I'm here just existing. And in the winter, I have to do all these things to be here. So it takes a lot more effort to be at that baseline in some scenarios, right? But that's how I reduce the friction, is by using the sunlight lamp, taking the vitamin D supplements, moving my body, etc. Or like leaving the country. I mean, this is something that I have always considered in my life because I want to live a life where I'm happy. I want to be my happiest, healthiest version of myself. And I also want you guys to realize you have so much power. If I want to just up and move, I literally can, right? And some of you might say that like, hey, Iman, I can't do that. Like, I have kids or I have ties here. Like, it's not easy to just make these decisions. And I understand that. And I'm not saying that everyone just has to make a decision like that, but I'm just saying there are always things you can do to reduce the friction in your environment to be the happiest and best version of yourself. And then that kind of addresses the nature versus nurture thing. Like at this point, I don't care if it's nature versus nurture. I just know that there are certain tools I need to do that will help me and certain systems that I need to put in place that will help me and that are specifically catered to me, okay? Okay, so with that being said, I want to touch on transformation and how to transform from a victim ego. So how do we diminish a victim ego and a victim identity, and how can we see real transformation in our lives? Number one, feel to heal, like I said, and then letting go of feelings that are expired and letting go of old stories. If you're ever in a scenario where you're discussing a past story, and this again is something that I'm working on, but if something comes up, if someone asks me a question and it brings up a story from the past, I would challenge you guys, and I challenge myself, to come from a place of neutrality when discussing a past scenario that doesn't affect your life anymore. So you just express it or explain the scenario very neutrally, right? If even necessary, if you even need to talk about this stuff, because the past is in the past. We don't need to even rehash it or bring it up. But if it does come up for whatever reason, approaching it and viewing it with a sense of neutrality. I know I'm referring to a lot of concepts that kind of indicate that we may have stories from the past, but I know that some of you watching this may be like, Iman, I'm going through the pain right now. Like, this is an ongoing thing. I'm going through a physiological traumatic event in this moment. And I want to be very, very clear and make the distinction that that is not victim ego. So if you are going through a specific traumatic event right now, this is not to say that the pain you're experiencing in this moment is invalid. You are not responsible for what is going on. You are not responsible for what happened to you, okay? You are only responsible for how you internalize it and heal from it. But the actual event, the trauma, or whatever it is that happened to you, that is not your fault. Real pain is your emotional truth. Ego pain is emotional truth plus the narrative that you attach to it, plus the identity you create from that. That is ego pain. I really need to be clear about that. Another way that I think we can find real transformation. I will die on this hill, but meditation has changed my life in ways that I can't even describe. And I actually want to make an entire episode on meditation, but I really, really stress using meditation as a form of healing and also as a way to transform your life. It is really good for regulation. It's amazing for focus. It's amazing for mental clarity. It's amazing for going inward. It's amazing for self-discovery. It's just like there are so many things, so many benefits of meditation. The research is out there, guys. So I will always urge you guys to meditate. Be gentle with yourself throughout this process and throughout this journey. We're all human. We're all here figuring out this life thing. There's no reason to be so hard on yourself and to treat yourself with harshness or disrespect. You can honor yourself and honor your experiences and be gentle with yourself throughout this journey, because that's how we will really start to heal ourselves and heal our inner child and whatnot. Just recognize the patterns within yourself, recognize the environmental factors that are standing in your way, and just start to tweak them a little bit. It's all about wanting something better for yourself and taking small steps and small strides to create that life for yourself. The very last thing I want to touch on is just a hard truth in life. The sooner that you're able to accept this, the sooner you'll be able to move on. Sometimes life isn't fair. There are certain things that, at least, again, and this is just perception, okay? But if you accept that perception sooner rather than later, you will be able to move on from it, right? Like, for instance, my mom and my dad got a divorce when I was a baby, and I was raised by a single mom with one parent, okay? We moved here to Canada. She had to bust her ass to just keep a roof over my head. And as I've grown up and learned a lot about my attachment style towards the people around me in my relationships, I noticed that it was people who had two very healthy parents that were able to have a very secure attachment and a secure sense of self. So I could sit here and say, damn, like life is so unfair. Like why do I not have a dad or whatever? Like why did other people get the luxury of having both parents or even having siblings and I didn't receive that? Like my life, honestly, as a kid was very, very lonely a lot of the time. I struggled with a lot of intense emotions surrounding like loneliness, emptiness from a very, very young age. And I could sit here and I can question and say like, why me? Why did that have to be my life? Why couldn't my mom have married someone that, would have been a nice, healthy father figure in my life? But what is that going to do? Me sitting here and putting salt on my wounds, what is that going to help? These are the cards I've been dealt. Okay, so the sooner that I can accept that, the easier my life will be. How can we make the most of the cards we've been dealt? And I will tell you a few things that have helped me in this example. Number one is it could have been worse. Okay, I could have grown up in a very toxic household and received my first ideas and notions of love based on that. So to be honest, like growing up with a single parent was probably the better of the two evils that could have occurred in my life. Number one. Number two, I know a lot of people who have really had it worse than me. Like growing up, I had friends who had been in the foster care system and who didn't have any parents. And so my thing is this, the cards that I've been dealt are the cards I've been dealt. There are other people who have had cards dealt to them that I perceive to be worse than mine, right? But there are plenty that I perceive to be better than mine. So why even bother to compare in the first place? Because if we compare to someone who's had it worse than us could turn into diminishing our pain, right? But if we compare to someone who has it better than us, that could turn into victim ego. So literally, why compare at all? And that's why I say, once you just accept the cards that you've been dealt, like this is your life, this is the life you've been given, now what? Accept it for what it is. Accept yourself for who you are. Accept your life for what it is, okay? And then try to find out how you can make the most of it. How can I make the most with what I have been given? How can I make the most with the body that I've been given? How can I make the most with the brain that I've been given? How can I make the most with the voice that I've been given? How can I make the most of the opportunities that I've been given, right? It might not be the best opportunities in comparison to other people. It might not be the worst either though, right? Just focus on your life and understand that this is what your life is, okay? And I say it's a hard pill to swallow because it sounds harsh, like this is just life, but if you look really, really closely, you will notice that it's actually a pretty good life, guys. And that's why I urge you to go out of your way. Go out of your way. If there's one thing you take from this episode, or one real challenge that I have for you, it's to go out of your way today to notice the amazing things in your life that you don't normally notice. And I'm not talking about the basic things that everyone says. What is the unique thing about your unique life that is so amazing? And I challenge you to go out and figure that out and try to find those like pockets of magic in your life and within yourself, and really pour into those things and really hone in on those things, because that will genuinely make everything feel so much lighter. I feel blessed in my life. I feel blessed to exist. I feel blessed for all of the friendships that I have. I feel blessed for my relationship and for my family, and I feel blessed for all the opportunities that I have. Like, there are just so many amazing things, and I just really want you guys to just like look a little bit harder and see if you can find those things in your life. Anyways, that's pretty much all I had to share today. If you have any thoughts, feelings, opinions, please drop them in the comments. Let me know if you think that victim ego has shown up in your life in any way at all, and how you're looking to transform and transcend it. Thanks again for listening, and I'll catch you guys next time. Bye.